One might wonder why the executive director of a nonprofit environmental protection organization like the Center for Natural Lands Management has to be as familiar with the city canyons of the San Francisco Financial District as he is with the wilderness canyons of California, Oregon, and Washington. What are the challenges as executive director of CNLM with the financial and the environmental aspects, and how does that feed into attracting potential contributors to CNLM?
As the executive director, that's my primary challenge, is to find that balance. It's not always easy. Staff doesn't always agree with me. In fact, they frequently don't. But the financial management and stewardship of the natural resources have to be balanced. One cannot take precedent over the other, or we will fail in our mission.
At CNLM, our mission is stewardship, perpetual stewardship. And it's natural to think about the land, habitat, and species that we protect, but it's also important to remember that we've been entrusted with financial resources, and they're equally important.
Donors and other supporters of the organization need to have total confidence in our management of these assets, both the natural resources, the species, populations, and habitats that we steward, but also the financial. In 2008, the endowments were at about 35 million. Today, they're at almost 100 million. We had under 20 full-time employees. We now have more than 80. We have about 100,000 acres under stewardship and protecting literally hundreds of important species and their populations and habitats. Sherry Teresa was the founder of Center for Natural Lands Management. She began creating a software program called the Property Analysis Record. We call it the PAR. The PAR helps us to analyze and determine the amount of money that's going to be needed on an annual basis for managing these resources and then turning that into an endowment. By having been so rigorous and been very successful in managing these resources, we have become literally the gold standard on the West Coast, certainly, for conservation.
One of the relationships that CNLM values is working with Common Fund. Common Fund has a narrow mission, focusing specifically on endowments.
My father was a lawyer. I went off to law school. It never occurred to me that I would be in the asset management business until after I was a practicing lawyer. It's really what my calling was and what I wanted to do. So Common Fund is an asset management company, and we're an interesting one, a unique one. We were actually founded back in 1971, so we are 46 years old now, and we were founded by the Ford Foundation, which is a sort of unusual way for an asset management company to be founded. But Ford was a major donor, obviously, to other nonprofits, and in particular back then to higher education. When you think about nonprofit organizations, they have the longest time horizon, right? They want to last perpetually. We have nonprofits in this country that are actually older than the country. I often say to people, think about what you did during the crisis. And most of us would say we tightened our belts. In fact, I bet if you think about the Center for Natural Lands Management or any other nonprofit, they couldn't tighten their belts, nor should they, because their constituents really needed them and maybe even needed them more.
It was an interesting time. Our endowment portfolio lost 40% of its value in the first 6 months I was on the job.
So what we've developed over many years is the investment model to try to help support that.
I graduated from the United States Military Academy and served in the Army for 5 years in Vietnam. And then I went to graduate school and got an MBA in finance. I'm the longest term member on the board of directors. I became first aware of the Center for Natural Lands Management as a land developer. We, of course, are all board members on the audit committee, and we report to the full board of directors of the center. One of our primary responsibilities is to oversee the annual audit, and that's a big endeavor, and it's very important, both from a transparency perspective and also from our knowledge that our policies and procedures are securing the assets and the resources of the organization so that we can accomplish our mission.
The first pillar of the investment model is you need to have stocks. You've got to have a bias for stocks and equity. They grow over time. If we look at the S&P 500, it's returned on average 4% more a year than the bond index over the last 30 years. The second bias that you have to have is you've got to be comfortable with the fact that illiquid markets generally pay a premium. It's called the liquidity premium. So if stocks earn 4% more than bonds over long periods of time, illiquid private equity tends to earn on average 4% more than public equity, public stocks. So you've got to be able to be comfortable with risk assets like that. And you also have to think about how to manage and measure that risk, diversification. And that's really the model, and it's one that we've followed for over 40 years now.
This is one of our anchor preserves for San Diego. We call it Rancho La Costa, and it's about 1,700 acres. Our budget here is close to $200,000 a year, and we have a lot of different obligations because it's so large and so expansive. 20 miles of edge with the urbanization areas, and we have to remove many non-native species. Countless hundreds of hours of patrol because we have so many users. We have trails and illegal use like trespassing into this canyon behind us.
I'm a relationship manager for the Center for Natural Lands Management. I've been in this industry in client service for the past 17 years. I've been with Common Fund for the past just going on 4.5 now. So I'm responsible for our client relationships basically west of the Mississippi. I actually got a bachelor's degree in geography, and so, really when I think about, what is geography, it's the world and everything in it, and sort of how did I end up in finance? When we really think about the capital markets and how interrelated everything is, and really kind of the connection between financial markets and how that supports conservation efforts, and how the weather might affect the habitat, that's really geography. It's really the way to explain spatial relationships.
Great, well that was exciting.
Yeah.
We just saw 3 bobcat in Box Canyon. Box Canyon's part of our Rancho La Costa Preserve. Certainly a very unique feature in Carlsbad to have such a big canyon this close to the coast.
We're looking down at this great canyon, we see these really cool little pools, and really at Common Fund what we do is we're working with perpetual pools of institutions, and so what we're really trying to do is make those last into perpetuity. So when we think about trying to help our clients meet their mission of that spend, their distribution, and that inflation over time, these are things that need to last forever.
Because if you think about it, you need to have, good sustainable financial practices, but you also need to have great governance and great policy. It takes both of those to really succeed over many years. And so we focus on both of those at Common Fund, the investment activities through our investment companies and the policy initiatives through our Common Fund Institute.
CNLM started in California. Recently we've been expanding into other states. One of the most important and our first big expansion was into Washington, where we now have multiple preserves and a very important partnership working with the Department of Defense. We're assisting Joint Base Lewis McChord in both reestablishing habitat for endangered species, but also acquiring properties off base for those same species and restoring them there, so that the military mission of readiness can be maintained while we also are protecting those species. It's a very exciting venture that's received very high regard from the Pentagon.
Even though the Center for Natural Lands Management's financial assets as well as the habitats and species are well managed, our biggest challenge is in supporting the underfunded preserves, the areas where there's not a lot of money to help the species and the habitats and those that are protecting them. So please, won't you consider the Center for Natural Lands Management in your giving?